Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Biblio Files, a show from the Ann Arbor District Library in Michigan that's all about books. Each episode, we spend a few minutes talking about one book-related theme, and this time we've read books that all have sentences for titles. My name is Christopher, and I'm here as always with Amanda and Lucy. Amanda, what did you pick for us this time?
So, sentences. I chose a book. It's a thriller called The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. And this book was published in 2018. And this author, he writes a lot of thrillers. He's got some really good ones out there. And I chose this book for today. And then I realized I'd discuss another title of his for something different. But I still chose it. So, this is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. And it focuses on a young woman named Emma. And 15 years ago, she was at Camp Nightingale. It was a sleepaway camp for kids. I think she was like 12 or 13 at the time. And she was staying in a cabin. And in the middle of the night, she watched her cabin mates leave the door, the last one being Vivian. And then those three girls stayed disappeared forever. And so she's haunted and traumatized by witnessing that and experiencing that and like what happened afterwards. So flash forward to now as an adult, she's in her 20s. She still thinks about those missing girls and what happened to them. And she lives in New York and she's made herself a bit of a name for the paintings that she's doing, but she can't let go of those missing girls. And so underneath her paintings, she actually paints the missing girls underneath them, which is kind of cool. But at one of her exhibits or art openings or something, there's a woman who's there. And it turns out that it's Francesca, and she's the wealthy owner of Camp Nightingale, which is where Emma went to school. And the woman wants Emma to come back to the school and be like an adult art camp counselor. And Emma is reluctant. She doesn't want to do it. And then eventually she agrees. And so Emma, as an adult, goes back to camp and she's in the same cabin. And things start to happen that are a little similar to things that happened when she was there as a young teen. All these memories flood back, the trauma, the drama. There's a few other people that are at camp that she knew from when she was a young teen there. They're there again as adults. New facts start surfacing on the disappearances that happened years ago. Things start happening now. And so Emma is caught up in this very intense, like cinematic way of putting things together and figuring it all out. So it's a really fast read. It's not these books for me, the books that this author writes, they're really breezy and quick. They're never 5-star books for me, but they're just really breezy and quick. And it's a great thriller. And you are kind of on the edge of your seat. And sometimes you can kind of guess what you think is going to happen. There's some things you don't quite get right. I really enjoyed this one. And that is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. Lucy, what is your bring?
I picked a book called Little Foxes Took Up Matches. This is by Katja Kasbeck, and it was just written, it's written in 2022. It was actually given to me as a Christmas gift, and I was like, oh, this is a sentence. So it is a book about a young boy named Mitya who is born in 1986 in Russia. And so the book starts in like 1990, 1990s at the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we get the story from Mitya's point of view. When he's 2 years old, he swallows a needle that his grandmother drops on the floor. And he believes that this needle protects him and gives him magical powers. Part of the reason he believes that is connected to this folktale or fairy tale figure named Kashe, who lives inside a needle, or is connected to a needle that's in an egg or something. And it's this immortal figure. So the chapters in this book actually alternate. We get chapters about Mitya's life, and then there are chapters which are really from the point of view of Kashe. And it's kind of interesting because there is this magical folktale element that's running along with it, but it makes sense in this book because for Mitya, that's very much his point of view is like, I mean, magic is a condition of his being because he swallowed this needle very early in his life. So he believes he's being protected. So that's just part of the story. It really is a coming of age story for Mitya. Mitya starts to dress up pretty early in his grandmother's clothes, and he realizes that that is something that is really close to his identity. So he has this whole other identity where he becomes this girl, and that's a big part of the story too. So it's this exploration of gender, it's this modern folktale, and then it's this whole sort of story of a family. We meet his parents. His grandmother plays a big role in his life. He has a cousin who comes to live with them after fighting, after coming back from war, and treats him horribly. It's kind of this weird situation. And then all of this is in front of the backdrop of the Soviet Union collapsing, which is pretty interesting. His parents lose their jobs because of all the things that were happening. That, you know, there's just like this extra stress in his life. So that sounds like a lot of stressful stuff, but it's actually a pretty funny book. He's a really funny character, and he meets these really interesting people. He travels around with them. He goes to these concerts in different people's apartments, and there's this whole like subversive culture that's rising that he really becomes part of. And that's where the title comes from. He hears this band playing this song, and one of the lines is, "Little foxes took up matches," but it actually comes from a children's rhyme. And the children's rhyme is about animals rebelling against their natural behavior. So it's kind of this perfect mirror for what Mitya's doing. And to be, you know, to like be genderqueer or to be, you know, trans or anything like that at this time in Russia would be highly frowned upon. So there's this sort of hidden part of his life that he has to discover too, and he has to discover who will support him in being that. It's also really funny because he's 10 years old for a lot of the story. So he seems really naive. And then you have to remind yourself, well, he is naive. He's 10 years old. And then there's this other part of the story. He's trying to solve a murder. He becomes friends with this homeless man, and the homeless man is killed. And Mitya decides it's his job to find out what happened to him. So there's this whole other like quest and mystery to try and solve that murder. And that's really part of what takes him into that counterculture and that whole other world. So it's just filled with really great characters. It's got this backdrop of an actual folktale, but then you have Mitya living his life where he believes part of his life is a folktale. And it's just so wonderfully woven together. It's really well written. I couldn't put it down. I enjoyed it so much. It was such a great gift to get. And as I was reading it, I was like, this title is a sentence. So it's perfect. So that is Little Foxes Took Up Matches. Christopher, what did you bring?
Well, I read one of my favorite authors, Kelly Link, and this is her first book of short stories, Stranger Things Happen, a Sentence. So this book came out in 2001. Kelly Link has 3 other books out now. But as I said, this is her first book. This is a collection of 11 short stories. So Kelly Link really likes to weave in a lot of elements from mythology and fairy tales and folk tales and even staples from horror and pop culture. And she puts them all together into these very charming and readable stories. But I'd say, you know, they're not just like tidy puzzles that you're trying to solve. And they're also not these overly didactic stories either. They're so interesting because oftentimes she puts these famous characters, maybe gods from mythology or vampires or whatever, in these very modern situations. So, you know, in one example in the book called Flying Lessons, there are all these gods and goddesses from mythology living in a small Scottish town, and some of them love perfume, and one works as a night baker. You know, so they're really just fun stories to read. My favorite story in here is a kind of retelling of The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen. And this was a story I read when I was very young, and it somehow captivated me so much with its strange sadness and almost not quite horror, but there's something very dark in that story. So Kelly Link has really changed it into something I would say much lighter and funnier. So in her version, um, she is talking about a so she's talking about Gerda, the girl that's left behind, and she's looking for Kay, who was taken by the Snow Queen. So Gerda is writing a list of all the things that she wants to tell Kay. So number one, I'm sorry that I forgot to water your ferns while you were away that time. Number two, when you said that I reminded you of your mother, was that a good thing? Later on in the list, number six, I never liked your mother. And number seven, after you left, I didn't water your plants on purpose. They're all dead. So they're often very funny stories, and I like them really a lot. As I said, she's one of my favorite writers. Um, so in closing, I just want to say her stories are really not like reading Wicked, which I find to be just kind of a straightforward retelling of a story from Oz. Neither are they like Angela Carter with her dense and beautiful language. These are just much more charming and readable, in my opinion. I just love Kelly Link, and if you haven't read her, you're in for a treat. So, three wonderful books to check out, all of which have sentences for titles. And as always, we would love to know what you're reading. You can let us know in the link below, and we'll see you next time.